So good day everyone, we are the Group 5 and we will be discussing today the topic Racism in History, the Legacy of Apartheid and Jim Crow Laws. So our topic overview, racism is a multifaceted and intricate problem based on the perception that one race is superior to another. This perception gives rise to prejudice, discrimination, and systemic inequalities that have afflicted societies for centuries. It comes in different forms, such as individual biases, institutional practices, and cultural norms that support the dominance of one racial group over others. So racism is a complex and deeply rooted issue that stems from the belief that one race is superior to another. It manifests through individual biases, institutional policies, and societal norms that reinforce discrimination. So there are two major historical systems of racial segregation. It is apartheid in South Africa and the Jim Crow laws in the United States. So for us to know what causes these systems, how did they affect society, and what lessons can we learn today, let us move on to the next slide.
Apartheid in South Africa, 1948 to 1994. So the definition of apartheid, or Afrikaans for apartness, was an institutionalized system of racial segregation, laws and restrictions. Black South Africans were forced to live separately from white South Africans. They had limited access to education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. The government controlled their movement through passbooks and residency laws. Resistance and change. Nelson Mandela and other activists fought against apartheid. He was imprisoned for 27 years for opposing racial injustice. Apartheid officially ended in 1994, with Mandela becoming South Africa's first black president. So there are three causes of apartheid and Jim Crow laws. First is colonialism and slavery. Both systems had their roots in the heritage of colonialism and slavery, whereby white Europeans gained supremacy over colored people and justified their exploitation through racist ideologies. Second, fear of black advancement. The emergence of black political and economic empowerment following the American Civil War and the abolition of colonial rule in South Africa contributed to wide anxiety about losing their privileged position. The abolition of slavery in the U.S. and South Africa's movement towards self-rule threatened white control. Racial segregation laws were created to maintain white economic and political power.
The last one is racist ideologies. Apartheid and Jim Crow both were based on racist ideologies that described black individuals as inferior and justified their inclusion from society as well as their denial of equal rights.
There are three effects of apartheid and Jim Crow laws. First is segregation and disenfranchisement. Both systems practice racial segregation in every sphere of life, such as housing, education, public accommodations, and voting. Racial minorities were denied fundamental rights and opportunities. Second, economic inequality. Racial discrimination in the workplace and access to resources created huge economic inequalities between white and black people. And the last one is violence and intimidation. Both systems employed violence and intimidation to implement their policies. Lynching in America and the violence of the South African police during apartheid were standard tools of terror.
So now let's move on to the real-world examples. So the first one is the apartheid laws. The government of South Africa enforced a chain of laws that divided people on the basis of race, limiting the movement, right to vote, and ownership of the land for Black South Africans. So the third real-world example is apartheid in South Africa. South Africa imposed from 1948 to 1994 a policy of racial discrimination and segregation in the form of apartheid. Apartheid categorized people along racial lines and limited the free movement, suffrage, and the property rights of Black South Africans. Apartheid contributed to endemic poverty, disparity, and violence against Black. The fourth example is the Jim Crow in the United States. After the American Civil War, the southern states enacted Jim Crow laws disenfranchising and segregating Black Americans. The law enforced segregation in schools, parks, libraries, transport, restaurants, and even cemeteries. Black Americans were kept from voting by poll taxes and literacy tests. They were lynched and subjected to other acts of violence. So the last real-world example is the war on drug and mass incarceration. The war on drugs has disproportionately affected Black and Latino communities. This policy has resulted in mass incarceration, with Black Americans incarcerated at 5 times at the rate of white Americans. This has had a devastating effect on Black families and communities, leading to poverty, unemployment, and lack of access to opportunities. So, although apartheid and Jim Crow laws are gone, racial inequality persists today. The first one is the mass incarceration in the US. The war on drugs disproportionately targeted Black communities, leading to high imprisonment rates. Second is the economic disparities. Black communities still face higher unemployment and lower wages compared to white communities. The last one is the educational inequality. Schools in predominantly Black areas receive less funding and resources.
These are the possible solutions on how can we address these issues. First is education and awareness. Educating individuals about the history and effects of racism is imperative in eliminating racist opinions and sentiments.
So the second is the anti-racism policies and legislation. Adopting anti-racism policies and legislations will help eliminate systematic inequalities and produce a fairer society. Governments should pass laws to combat systematic racism and ensure equal opportunities.
The third one is diversity and inclusion initiatives. Encouraging diversity and inclusion across all areas of society can contribute to a more representative and equal society. Businesses and institutions should promote diversity in leadership, employment, and education.
The fourth one is the economic empowerment. Economic opportunities and resources provided to communities of color can assist in bridging the wealth gap and rectifying the economic inequalities. Providing resources, fair wages, and economic opportunities can help reduce the racial disparities.
So our last possible solutions is reparations. Rectifying historical injustice through reparations can offer economic and social justice to communities who have been disadvantaged by racism. Addressing historical injustice through reparations can support communities impacted by racism.
So for the conclusion of our topic, the legacies of Jim Crow and apartheid continue to affect societies in the present day, emphasizing the long-lasting influence of systemic racism. Although these systems have been removed, the struggle for racial equality and justice is still present. There is a need to acknowledge the systemic nature of racism and endeavor to destroy the structures that propagate inequality. We must all contribute towards building a fairer and more equitable society for everyone. So the legacies of apartheid and Jim Crow laws still affect the society today. Ending these systems did not automatically erase racial inequalities. It is our responsibility to fight for equality by educating ourselves, speaking out, and advocating for change. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect regardless of race.
So this is the end of our discussion in the topic of racism in history, the legacy of apartheid and Jim Crow laws.
So guys, hope you learned something from our discussion and apply it in your daily life. That's all guys. Thank you for watching. Bye.